Hello and welcome back to the House of Hoosier podcast presented by the Field of 68 Podcast Network, where we are still waiting for Anthony Leal's shot to fall from the sky after that just amazing performance against Rutgers. We're going to break everything down here for you. I'm Ian Plaskoff. He's Austin Platt. And Austin, I'm feeling pretty good this morning. We're recording this the morning after the game. A lot of good things to say, and I got to say, I've been the more optimistic one throughout the year, but it's just going to continue to grow.
Yeah, this is a great way to start the new year. I saw 8:30 tip. You're like, oh God, I'm gonna have to, bore myself with just torture myself really with 2 hours of IU Rutgers basketball. These are always low scoring games. You hear about the injury news. You're like, oh God, what's this game gonna look like? And what do you know? A solid performance from IU, a 10-point win. I was like gonna just hate watch the entire game just to keep myself awake. And what do you know? IU puts together a pretty pleasing performance and a game they needed to win. They needed to protect home floor, as Mike Woodson said afterward, and they did just that.
Yeah, I was telling my parents, I'm here at home. And I was telling my parents because they're true IU basketball fans. They've been there throughout, their whole lives. I was like, you set your expectations a little bit too high for what this team is right now. So just go in without any expectations and see what happens. And sure enough, the expectations were exceeded pretty thoroughly. And I never really go in with a feeling of, oh, they're gonna lose. I go in with a blank slate and see, after the first 10 minutes, I could probably make a guess as to how this is gonna go. But I mean, all the way through, pleasantly surprised. I mean, Ace Bailey had his little run. We'll talk about him. But other than that, nothing really to complain about and a lot of good things to see.
Yeah, a ton of positives from this game, and it stinks that kind of Indiana has to play its best basketball when one of its best players gets hurt within the first minute. But you have to adjust in this game, and Indiana figured that out. And I thought the lineups that Indiana put together, for the most part, it's always for the most part with this team. There's always that stretch where you're like, who is on the floor and why? But I thought overall everyone had a great game. And Oumar Ballo, I mean, just phenomenal when he needed to step up in the absence of Reneau, and everyone else chipped in. And hey, look at the three-pointers, man. We've been saying this all year, but a remarkable 12 of 27 for IU in this game. And they needed to stretch the floor with the absence of a big man, and they did just that.
Yeah, you can kind of put an asterisk on both these teams for this game. Of course, Rutgers the bigger one, with Dylan Harper ruled out, game time decision, traveled with the team. He was ready to warm up, and he just decided he couldn't go. He was sick. So that's Rutgers losing averages of 23, 5, and 5 on the floor offensively. He's their best player, but Ace Bailey stepped up. And then for Indiana, Malik Reneau injured 2 minutes in. But like you said, Austin, I mean, with that lineup with Oumar Ballo it was what Galloway or not Goody, Rice, Mbako, and Galloway, I think around him. I love that lineup personally. I thought it was flowing much better. I thought it just worked better than Renew because when you have Renew in the game with Ballo, the ball kind of stops and the offense gets stagnant. I didn't see much of that. It opened up the floor for 3-point shots, and sure enough, 12 of them went in, which was a high for the Woodson era. Um, Now, is when Renew comes back, are they going to keep that? Probably not. But it got Indiana through this game. But again, you got to look at both sides. No Dylan Harper for Rutgers, no Renew for Indiana. This game could have gone differently for both sides, but um, you can only play with the cards you're dealt. And I said that to my friend who was at the game. He happens to go to Penn State actually. He was like, "Oh, you got to put an asterisk here." And I said, "You can only play with the cards you're dealt." And I don't know if you're a Euchre guy, Austin. I know a lot of the people listening to this are Euchre people with Indiana. And I did the most Indiana thing I've ever done in my life last night of comparing basketball lineups to Euchre hands. Okay. So Rutgers is a team that usually plays with the right and the left bower and then a bunch of tens and nines because they've got Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Now, in this game, the right bower was buried. They only had to play with the left with Ace Bailey, which won the hand, but they still had tens and nines left in their hand. Indiana had the ace, queen, king, and found a way with another thing in their hand to scrape by and pull out the win. Rutgers is a team that usually wins games with both their bowers, tries to get one more trick to win the hand. They didn't have that extra bower right there with Dylan Harper, lost the hand because Indiana had the better hand in the end, with not necessarily the best players in the game, but the more complete hand. How about that for a Euchre reference?
I don't know if your New Year's resolution was to just make phenomenal comparisons and analogies, but that is that's up there right there. That might be the best one we hear of 2025 anywhere in the world. So well done. I had the euchre hands pulled up on Google here, so I was following along and I got it. I haven't played euchre in a long time, but I didn't lose me. So everyone watching and listening clearly knows more about euchre than I do. And if you don't, well then you just did because that was the greatest minute recap I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, that is just the definition of being a true Hoosier right there, born and raised.
Can't say the same.
But at any rate, that left Bauer, Ace Bailey, he was playing like a right Bauer. How about that? He had 39 points, 29 shots, outscored the rest of his team by himself, and was a point away from becoming the fourth 40-point scorer as an opponent in Assembly Hall. And the shots that he was knocking down, I mean, there's just nothing you can do. He's a special talent.
He is, and Robbie Hummel said it best. Like this guy's a pro already, which is just scary to think about as a freshman. And Galloway did an okay job. Leal, in many situations, like is straight up playing as well as you can, and just look like, and just the shot from Bailey, like the way you're watching it, almost looks like he's shooting down at the basket just by the way he gets up in the air, and it's just a no arc shot that just goes in every time. And you're like, what the heck? And Indiana finally figured out in the second half how to slow him down a little bit, kind of just drew some more doubles, and you're all right, fine to get beat by somebody else. But that was a really awesome display to watch from Bailey. 8 rebounds as well. I think he had like 4 blocks too, something sprinkled in there. But he was phenomenal. Yeah, 4 blocks in the game for Ace. And hey, you don't have all the cards in your deck in your hand at times, but if sometimes one is almost good enough to win you a game, and that was almost the situation we had at Assembly Hall. But Indiana just more balanced scoring, and you kind of knew that either you got to give up a bunch to Ace and don't let anyone else get double digits, or just kind of contain Ace Bailey. And if someone else goes for 15, then that's fine. But Indiana did a good job in the second half, and the defense won them the game. And making enough threes was huge in this one.
Well, you look at Rutgers on the box score, and I mean, it's one of the funnier box scores I've seen in a while. And Ace Bailey, 16 for 29. The rest of the team was, let's see, 11 for 32. And nobody else scored in double digits. Jermichael Davis had 9, Jeremiah Williams 8, and Lathan Somerville 8, Tyson Acuff 7, and then Jordan Durkak 3, and that was it. I mean, this was a clear game plan. I mean, you game plan for Dylan Harper as well because he was there. He was warming up for the game and decided he couldn't go. But at a point, you just got to be like, Ace Bailey's going to be the star of this team. If we can let him get what he gets, try to stop him, but put more focus on stopping everybody else, we're probably going to have a good chance to win this game. That's exactly what Indiana did. It worked. Um, that's not to discredit Ace Bailey in any way because that was one of the best visiting performances at Assembly Hall I've seen. But Rutgers just didn't have enough. Again, they were stuck with those 10s and 9s in the offsuit.
There you go. Got to keep at it. And yeah, it's one of those situations where you're gonna get, yeah. What am I trying to say? You're gonna let Bailey get his, and it's like he completely made up for the absence of Harper. Like they had averaged between the two of them, I think, over 50% of Rutgers' scoring. And last night Bailey goes for 39 of Rutgers' 74, which is well above 50%. So it's almost like if Harper plays in this game, then obviously the game plan is a little bit different. But you're like, you just basically acted like Bailey and Harper combined into one supreme ace Bailey and just one incredible player. That's exactly what happened. But scoring wise, like everything else was the same throughout the rest of Rutgers' team, and they just don't have a ton of depth. They were in foul trouble a little bit. Indiana was at the line plenty in this game. And overall, I mean, you stick to a game plan. Like Thomas said it really, really well. And obviously, the big thanks to him for coming on. Like Rutgers has struggled defensively and rebounding, and Indiana brought down 18 offensive rebounds in this game, 34 second chance points. You can continue to keep the ball on one end of the floor. You're going to get good shots. You're going to kick the ball out. You're going to get the ball back inside immediately. I thought Indiana's passing this game was phenomenal, and there were still some open shots that didn't fall. But overall, once again, stick to a game plan and get to it. And you don't, go away from the game plan just because Rutgers is out somebody or you lose somebody in the first few minutes with Malik Reneau. So credit to the staff and credit to the players for executing.
I think those offensive rebounds and second chance points, along with the defense, was really what kept Indiana in this one because they didn't shoot the ball well necessarily. Overall, they shot 28 for 72. That's 38.9%. Now, the three-point shooting saved them as well, 12 for 27. But when you're missing that many shots, I mean, you look at players like Miles Rice, who had 21, he shot 6 for 15, and Baco 5 for 13, Galloway 4 for 11. Ballo was relatively efficient, 7 for 13. But this is not an efficient shooting night, but they were able to get those second chance points, knock down threes, and then on the defensive end, it was kind of an easy game plan. You just have to put more focus on everybody else, let Ace Bailey do what he does because he's not going to make every shot that he takes, although it kind of felt like it at some points. Um, and they transition that, play at your own pace, and win the game on both sides of the floor, and that's exactly what happened with Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, and Indiana held on to the basketball. Like, it's one of the biggest things is how you keep the ball on one end of the floor is you don't turn the ball over. Only 8 turnovers. I want to say that's the low for this year. I haven't like exactly, combed through it, but it feels like Indiana's always in double digits close to halftime and only 8. I only think they had 1 turnover at halftime, and that was at the break. We're like, oh boy, Ace Bailey, like it's gonna be one of these nights. Like I don't know how many he had in the first half compared to the second half, but I mean, I think he had much more of his 39. I know he had 19 in the first half and 20 in the second half, so a pretty even performance across the two halves. But at halftime, Indiana's up by 7. Obviously, the Leal shot was huge to make it from 4 to 7, and Rutgers was coming back. But this is a game Indiana was up by like 18 points, and Rutgers got back into it with an 8-0 run. It was like an 8-point game. I was like, oh God, is Indiana really going to blow this game? Like, you have all the momentum on your side, and but they did enough and made enough of their free throws, even though it was a little bit ugly. It feels like always against Rutgers, Indiana just can't make free throws. 16 of 25. Ballo was 3 of 9. But credit to Oumar Ballo in this game. Like people said coming into this year with Ballo's and his film at Arizona, they're like, well, he's a liability to have at the end of games because he gets tired. He can't make free throws. He's obviously great rim protector. He had 3 or 4 blocks in this game, and obviously misses some bunnies at times. People are like, Ballo gets tired. He's not going to work in the system. Like he was a reason why Arizona couldn't live up to its potential the past few years. He proved everybody wrong in a game like this, Ian. I mean, 32 minutes, 17 points, 3 of 9 free throws. That's just a byproduct of being on the floor for much more than he's used to. And I give credit to him, and I give credit to the staff as well for building him up. It was the same with Khalil Ware last year. He couldn't stay on the floor at Oregon, whether it's the foul issues or really just being tired. And I think Ballo was kind of the same way. And we saw last night that he can hang out with the big boys, and obviously Rutgers a little thin at the center position, but he still performed and above his head and shoulders above what we're used to see him performing. 17 points, 12 rebounds, just 1 foul, 1 turnover in 32 minutes. Credit to Oumar Ballo. I think he gets my game ball just because he needed to step up and did, and I think he kind of proved a lot of doubters wrong from what we heard what he was gonna be like coming over from Arizona.
And then you add to the social media mishap or whatever you may want to call that, and the benching, the questionable status, the injury, whatever it was, we don't really know. Um, he didn't start, and I think that was an important thing to note is that if Malik Reneau did not get hurt, I'm not sure if Balla would have played that game because he was the same status um for the last game against Winthrop, except he didn't warm up that game. That was the only difference. He was still in uniform, still on the bench. Um, but Malik Reneau goes out with 2 minutes, 2 minutes into the game, and you see Oumar Ballo get up off the bench, and the crowd kind of notices that, gets into the game a little bit, and then right as he comes onto the floor, he just starts doing everything that he was built out to be, like you said. And I saw more energy from him. I saw him getting the crowd more involved. I saw the crowd feeding or him feeding off the crowd, crowd feeding off him. And he had the highest plus minus on the team. Actually, check that. Behind Mackenzie Mbako, he was second. He had a plus 21 for this game. He was the lone big for most of it. You had a few minutes of Langdon Hatton, which did not go so well. Um, but I think the lineup around him helped him even more without the two bigs because it allowed him to shine in the paint. It allowed him to get more spacing with the shooters out on the perimeter making threes. It really felt like everything was working with that lineup, and it was a good sight to see from Ballo.
This is what Indiana basketball should be. Like this is what we make out to be IU basketball. Like you recruit shooters, some of them in state, like you have this year with Goody and Galloway, who at times played very well off each other. I know Galloway didn't have a great game. He fouled out and took some ill-advised shots, but like this is the way this team should have been all year long. Like this is how the team was constructed. You got at least more consistent, more potential, higher ceiling of three-point shooting. You bring in Luke Goody. Like Miles Rice showed that he can be a 35, 36% three-point shooter last year. Late on in the year, like in January and February, he had an incredible stretch. After the first half of the year, he really couldn't make many threes. Carlisle, I know, wasn't great last night, just 1 of 4 from beyond the arc, but he can make 1 or 2. Galloway even 3 of 6 from beyond the arc. Mbako 3 of 7. Goody 3 of 5. This is the team it always should have been, and it stinks that Indiana's maybe best game shooting this entire year is the night you lose Malik Reneau due to a knee injury. Literally, it says 0 minutes on the box score because I think he literally got injured with like 59 seconds in, and you're not going to get credit for a minute played if you don't play the full 60 seconds. So it's kind of just one of those situations, but this is the team we've been waiting to see the entire year, and I hope Malik Reneau is healthy. We're recording this, as you mentioned, immediately after the game the next morning, and we don't know the situation with Reneau. He tried to stay in the game, but the officials wouldn't let him because they stopped the game for so long, and then went to the locker room, came back with a bag of ice on his right knee, and didn't return. And we knew that in the middle of the first half that he'd be out for the rest of the evening. But this is what the IU team should have looked like all year long. You play 4 out, you have a solid big who can get offensive rebounds. Indiana did a great job passing the ball. There were even at times in the second half where Indiana took some lazy, mid-range jumpers and didn't actually force the ball inside because that's where it was working. And even if you weren't making shots, you were getting offensive rebounds. You were tapping it back out for second chance threes. This is the IU team we've been waiting to see all year long. And I hope it's not just because Malik Reneau's injury is the reason why we see this style of basketball that flows so much better. And the defense is still there on the defensive side, the other side of the floor. You're not losing that much height when Reneau goes out because you can bring Goody, who's like 6'6", 6'7", and has made some strides defensively from where he was last year at Illinois. So I'm just hoping that this is not like a one-off, and this is really what IU basketball can look like for the rest of the year because this was the expectation, this was the potential Indiana was supposed to live up to. They haven't so far, but a game like this, albeit without Harper on the other end, this is what could spark Indiana going forward.
I was in the exact same thought process as you. When Malik Reneau left the game and immediately Indiana found out a way to score the ball efficiently and find a way to work offensively, play well on the defensive end. It was a good thing to see, but it also makes you a little bit concerned as to what Malik Reneau's role could be if that is the reason um, that Indiana worked out so well. Now, can you really put a guy like Malik Reneau on the bench? Um, you, it's a tough question to ask because again, you look at the bench. Um, Bryson Tucker, 0 points. Langdon Hatton did not play well. Anthony Leal did play well, and he was a pleasant surprise. And 5 points, with three of those being that rainbow shot at the end of the half. But he played well on the defensive end, made some good plays, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Carlisle, again, not a good shooting night, 1 for 7. So this was mostly a starters game with Rice 21, Mbako 16, Galloway 11, Goody 9, and then Ballo 17. You could technically call him a starter. Um, so if you put Malik Reneau on the bench with those lineups, that does kind of extend your lineup a little bit and doesn't it kind of manages the fall off to the bench, which has happened recently in Big Ten play with Tucker and Carlisle struggling shooting. So it may not be the worst thing. The question is Indiana willing to do that with one of their best players?
We had talked about lineups a few episodes ago, and it's always something to mention with this IU team and just the style they play and how to get the best five on the floor while making sure you also have bench depth. And I remember we said, oh, let's try Mbako on the bench. And, just thinking about defensively, like we've said this year, day in and day out, week in and week out. Reneau and Mbako obviously at times are defensive liabilities. They have lapses. So a little bit of that with Mbako last night had 3 fouls. I think a couple of them were silly, and a couple of times he was out of position where he didn't need to be. But I'm fine bringing Reneau off the bench. Like he is the bigger defensive liability, and we've said it. He's a junior now. Like you are what you are on the defensive end of the floor. He's just not up to the standard, and that's why he may not be NBA ready just because defensively he can't stay on the floor. And I'm fine. Like you have to, like in all seriousness, you have to kind of keep Mbako on the floor because he's your best shooter. We think. That's what everyone says. That's what all the scouts say. That he's shooting wise got such a good stroke. He's confident, and the last few games he's really proven that after he kind of hit a little bit of a dry spell at the end of November and the beginning of December. But like I'm fine bringing Renew off the bench. Like change it up. Like Ballo obviously is going to get tired. He's not going to play 32 minutes every single night. Like bring somebody else who can bring a spark off the bench. And I know off the bench you kind of want like someone who defensively can hold it down or a three-point shooter. You don't really get either of those with Renew, but I'm fine splitting it up to play four out, and I think give a better chance of not getting off to a slow start with Renew on the bench. Just because some of the times, like in the Nebraska game, or no, that was in Baco, they got the two early fouls, but there are times where like Renew's going to get 2 fouls within the first media timeout, and he's on the bench for 16 plus minutes. Like you just don't want that to happen, and in order to do that, you play him less minutes, you don't start him. So I think there's definitely a shout for that. And I mean, hey, if Indiana plays like the way they did last night, they're going to win a lot of games in the Big Ten. It's just not every night where you're going to have everyone making shots and clicking on all cylinders. But we've always said we want to see a change in the starting five. We've kind of gone back and forth on who we want out, who should come in. We've given a shout to Carlisle, who I know hasn't shot the ball well, but defensively he's looked really good this year. But I'm open for anything, and I'm fine to. It's either Renew or Mbako that you want to have on the bench just because of defense, and I'd rather go with Renew and play four out because it worked last night.
It's kind of like what we saw. I mean, I think I've said this before. I've been a Pacer fan for a while. And the Turbonis experiment that happened a few years ago when Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis tried to start together with Sabonis at the power forward, Turner at the center. It's kind of like what you're seeing here with Renew and Ballo with these two big lineups. Now it works better in college than in the NBA, but when the Pacers split up Turbonis, and ultimately that it worked out differently because they traded for Tyrese Halliburton, whatever. But in this situation, if you split up Renew and Ballo, put Renew on the bench, and you can have one of them on the floor at all times for 40 minutes a game, um, and then you have a starting lineup of something like you saw against Rutgers with Rice, Goody, Galloway, Mbako, and Ballo, and then you could put a five bench player lineup out there of Renew, Leal, Tucker, Carlisle, and even if you wanted to go two bigs off the bench, you could put Hatton in there. I think that would make this team so much deeper, so much more complete. It would limit the fall off of the bench. But again, we don't know how severe Malik Renew's injury is, and we hope that it's not bad. Um, and we also hope that him being out is not the reason that this team was successful because he's a great player. You want him to be on your team, you want him to be a contributor, but that could just be taking on a different role throughout the season and seeing if that helps you in the Big Ten slate. If things need to change at some point, that could be a possibility. Now, it's not in the end all be all of if this team is going to be good or not, as if Malik Reneau starts or comes off the bench, but it could be an important thing to look at.
Yeah, I think we've always said this with the three-point shooting and the guys that have played at Indiana that, just the three it hasn't worked out, the outside shooters that have transferred and you look at someone like Tamar Bates who's had a solid year at Missouri, like Indiana has always recruited like guys who are good at taking the three. The problem is they just have never gotten enough shots. You can never gain confidence, and it's always the volume of three-point shooting to where three-point shooters are not going to come to Indiana because they're not getting enough shots in games, and that's the most valuable experience. And sure, you can say practice this, practice that, but I mean, Tamar Bates like did not get enough threes when he was at IU and wanted a different system and wanted something that worked better for him, and that's clearly happened at Missouri. He had that like 30 plus point game. Maybe it was closer to 40 earlier this year with the Tigers. And it's like he just never got that at IU. And even someone like Liam McNeely, who obviously is much more of a combo player, but he was supposed to be a great three-point shooter. And look what he saw last year. I know there was some recruiting issues. Indiana didn't, wasn't in contact enough with him. Regardless, like you look at the system that Indiana has played in years past, it doesn't favor three-point shooters. And it's not because these shooters aren't good enough. It's because they don't get enough shots during the game. They don't get enough consistency, and the playing time is just it's all spread out because you have to focus on your two big men. And this is a clear example of why you need to take enough three-point shots to not only succeed in this game of college basketball, but to set up the future as well. So you're getting enough guys to come in who are solid three-point shooters because you look at the three-point shooters that Indiana has. Mbako obviously committed to Duke and then decommitted, so you didn't get him the first go around. Goody obviously committed Illinois, transferred to Indiana. Miles Rice, another transfer. Galloway is not known as a three-point shooter, but obviously you've had him from the very beginning. But you look at these guys that Indiana has gotten in the portal to play, but you haven't actually recruited them because guess what? They look at the system, they say, we're not going to get enough shots. And this is the example of why you need to get enough three-point shots every single game to make sure you have confidence from every guy throughout to succeed in this system. And we saw that last night, and I just hope that this is a sign of things to come. And hopefully, as we've said multiple times on the show today, hopefully it's not just because Malik Reneau was hurt in the first minute.
Now, I think back to, was it the Nebraska game where Indiana shot, what, 36 threes or something
Something
like
like
that?
that.
The
Yeah.
difference in that game was that those threes were not in a system. Those threes were just, I'm going to dribble down the court and shoot a three. That's what watching the NBA is today.
Yeah.
Like if you watch a Laker game or a Celtics game in particular, you'll just see 100 3-pointers from both teams. The Celtics shot 57 threes last night, and they average like 50 plus a game. So for one, that shows you where basketball is going in general and why these recruits want to be in a place where they can shoot the three ball. It's because that's what's going to get you in the NBA. But then you also look at the style of where those are coming from. It works in the NBA because it's, not as strong defensively and the players are more talented from a scoring perspective. But in college, you cannot just go down and jack up threes all game like Indiana did against Nebraska. They have to come with ball movement. They have to come with player movement. It has to come in a system. Indiana shot 27 threes, and it looked a whole lot different than what happened in Nebraska, even though it was just right up there with how many threes Indiana shot in Lincoln. But this was, I loved it. I loved the shots Indiana was getting. The corner threes were open. The pull up step backs from Mbako, he cleared space for himself. The catch and shoot three, it was just great. They made 12, which was a pleasant surprise. And I hope it continues.
Yeah, and it's just a really good sign. And I know the Nebraska game, Indiana was down 10 like 2 minutes in, and it was like they were playing that game as if they were down 10 the entire game and just needed to keep shooting threes. That was not the situation, number one. They should not have taken that many threes, and we've talked about that. But in this game, like it's back and forth. Like Ace Bailey's given as much as he has, and Indiana's doing everything they have, and they took the right shots, and that's what matters. And they're not always going to fall, and it's not always going to be what north of 40% like it was last night. Yeah, 44%. It's not going to be like that every night, especially when you're on the road in a different environment. But just to have confidence in every single shot that, all right, I have a good feeling this one's going to go in, and we felt that way for most of those 27 threes that were taken last night. And against Nebraska, it's like, oh God, this one isn't going to go in. And even if it does, you're like, all right, that's still not the shot you want to take, especially it was so early in the shot clock and you were playing just up and down the floor. And last night, offensively, these teams usually known for their defense in years past, offensively are much better this year. And you have more confidence for them to go up and down the floor. And we saw that early on. And it's like a horse race, it felt like. Just you're going up and down and up and down, and it's just nonstop. But Indiana took the right shots, and that's what matters. And hey, give a credit to Anthony Leal. Like everyone's been saying, like over the past few years, like when Leal plays like 20 plus minutes, like Indiana like wins like every single time. Like I think there was 6-0, I think, over the past few years when Leal has played, and obviously his playing minutes have significantly increased. But 18 minutes last night, obviously hit that incredible shot, but 5 rebounds, 4 assists as well. He deserves some more playing time in all of this because Tucker clearly looks like a freshman in this system. Hasn't really found his groove. Carlisle, shooting night feels like he's only had 1 or 2 good shooting nights this year. Like, give Anthony Leal some more playing time, especially on a night where you needed him defensively against Ace Bailey. You got that. So hey, we're talking about lineup switches and what happens if Reneau isn't healthy for the next game and moving forward. Like Anthony Leal deserves some more minutes, man.
It feels like whatever game Anthony Leal plays a good deal of minutes in, it feels like we call it the Anthony Leal game.
Yeah,
Like I know exactly what you mean by that, what you just said. Like you think back to the Ohio State game last year, Anthony Leal game. You think back to, I mean, you can even go back to high school and you think of the game winner against Silver Creek. That's the Anthony Leal game. The shot last night, Anthony Leal game. I mean, there was a putback layup in the Big Ten tournament last year, right?
Penn State.
That,
Yeah.
yep, Anthony Leal game. Like he hasn't played a lot in his Indiana career, which it wasn't really expected when he was a high school recruit, but whatever game he's played in, he's made his mark on. That's why the crowd loves him so much. It's why he gets a standing ovation every time he checks in or checks out of a game. And I'm with you. I think he deserves more minutes. He's one of Indiana's better players defensively on the perimeter. He can impact games without necessarily scoring. And he almost had a half triple double with 5.54. Now that's a stat I just invented myself, but
Love it.
it's he was a plus. Oh no, he was a -4, but that was because the bench unit didn't help him out too much. But yeah, I'm with you. More minutes for Anthony Leal.
Yeah, I mean, he's 2 of 3 this year from 3-point land. He's taken 7 shots this year. He's missed one. He's missed one shot he's taken this year, albeit, okay, fine, he's 6 of 7. Small sample size, but I mean, he's just enough of a threat to shoot the ball and to do something offensively where you have to game plan for him. This is not like Gabe Cupps last year where fine, just leave him on an island, let him take a three. If he makes it, fine, you're gonna let him take that every single time. Like it's Anthony Leal. Like this guy's been in Indiana for a long time. He came back for another year when at times he had no business doing that, and is such a big leader on this team. And and Indiana was, I think at one point Ballo had checked. No, Carlisle. He got the technical foul last night. Another just random technical foul that occurs during an IU Rutgers game. But you see him on the bench, like making sure Carlisle's like let it go. Like next play is yours. I think Ball was on the bench too, and he was tired, but you could just see him. His impact on the bench is incredible, and he's got 4 offensive rebounds this year, 13 rebounds total, averaging about 1.5 a game, 8 assists. He doesn't turn the ball over. Pick up a few steals. Like he deserves some more minutes. And I know in Big Ten play it's a little bit different, but you mentioned it. We can rattle off all the Big Ten games he had an impact on. Iowa, that was like I think one of the first games where he had a huge impact. Like had like I think his most points he's ever scored.
I
Like
think
had
he
like
had
13
13 that
points, made
game.
like 3 threes, got a bunch of big rebounds at the end of that game as Indiana finally beat Fran McCaffrey for the first time under Mike Woodson. But it's like every Big Ten game. It was Luke Goody said it. I think after the Sam Houston State game this year, he's like, I could be sitting on my couch last year at Illinois and be like, look, Anthony Leal's making an impact in a Big Ten game. Play him. He deserves it. He's a fifth-year guy. The fans love him. The team loves him. And no one's going to hate Anthony Leal no matter what he does because of what he brings. Maybe it's just the Leal deal. Maybe that Mother Bears is a huge one. And people were talking about that last night. But he is the Leal deal. He plays well, and there are multiple games that back that up.
Yeah, I think with Leal, he's one of the guys on this team that you'll see show consistent effort, a consistent want to attitude. He brings energy, and that's something this team has lacked, as we've talked about this season, in past seasons, and many past seasons. Um, but this game against Rutgers, it did not feel that way. I felt like Leal and most of the rest of the team showed a good deal of effort and want to. I mean, you can see at least statistically, the offensive rebounds, 18, 34 second chance points. I mean, the effort stats are there. You look at turnovers forced to double digits, only committed single digit turnovers. There were guys diving for loose balls. I mean, they look like a wrestling match out there between Miles Rice and I can't remember who the Rutgers player was, but they were on the floor multiple times throughout this game. Um, Rice has been one of the more consistent guys in the effort category for me. But it was a good thing from to see from guys like Mbako, from Carlisle, from Ballo, to see them kind of step up and take a little edge into this game and kind of play with a chip on their shoulder, play like it is a Big Ten game against Rutgers because those games are always physical, they're always fun. And I loved the effort that I saw out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team like, and I thought this at the beginning of the year, like, there's a lot more offensive firepower with this team where I'm more comfortable for them to push it up and down the floor. Like, I'm more comfortable this game's like a little bit out of hand or a little bit crazy just because I think IU has enough to win this game, especially on their home floor. And there's a really good crowd last night as well. And you could tell when that half court shot went in, it's like, all right, like this is the crowd we've been waiting to see from IU this year, even without students. But I've always said that there's enough scoring on this team, and I think there's just enough defense because they've been playing tougher as of late, and they needed to because the non-conference schedule, they did not do very well. And if we graded the non-conference schedule on a scale of 1 to 10, it is like 5 or 6. Like Indiana did not impress anybody whatsoever in non-conference play after last year where they were abysmal and somehow didn't even lose a bye game, but it felt like they did. But it's just like Indiana has a ton to prove in Big Ten play, and a performance like this, an effort level like this, I think will be on a weird night last night in the Big Ten, like a couple of really odd games. We'll talk about Penn State in a moment. They kind of may or may not have gotten bailed out of a win against Northwestern, but like this is a performance that the Big Ten has been waiting, and I think opposing teams have been waiting to see IU play a game like this. And it's against a shorthanded Rutgers team, and they only won by 10, but they really dominated, I think, this from essentially from start to finish, even though they were down like 8 at one point in the first half. It's like, all right, when is Ace Bailey going to finally miss a shot? Because then that's where Indiana can go on their run, play their game, and really control it. Because that's what they did for the majority of the second half. This wasn't like an 18-point game with like I want to say 8 minutes left or something, or maybe it was 10 minutes left. But it was like Indiana was really in cruise control, and this game should have been won by more than 10 points, but you're glad it's double digits in the end. And Indiana's spot in the net went up by 5 points because that's what you have to look at this day and age in college basketball.
Yeah, I think the proving is what needs to happen because you look at, like you said, a team like Penn State, who Indiana is going to play next. That is a team that has consistently given Indiana trouble in recent years. I think back to, I think 2 or 3 years ago where they hit like 17 threes at the Bryce Jordan Center. They swept Indiana last year on the home and away series. Um, and this is, I mean, a new coach at Penn State for the past 2 years, I think. But whether it was Mike Shrewsbury or remind me who their new coach is, I don't remember.
Mike Rhodes.
Mike Rhodes, that's right. Whether it's Shrewsbury or Rhodes, this is a team that has consistently given Indiana trouble. And Penn State is off to a hot start this year, 12-2, fourth in the Big Ten right now, coming off a win against Northwestern. But then you add that this game is going to be in the Palestra. That's going to be a tough place to play. I do think Indiana will travel well with all those East Coast fans. Um, but that's not going to matter if Indiana can't combat Penn State because it has not been able to in recent years. Um, just Austin, what are your thoughts on this Penn State team? What does Indiana need to highlight? What does Indiana need to do to prove that they belong, like you said?
Yeah, the biggest thing is like this is a Penn State team. You look at their games this year. Their two losses. They lost to Rutgers, ironically, at the rack, which is kind of just like typical, just like a team like Penn State that shoots the ball well, only scores 76. Only scores 76. We just say that casually, but I mean, look at the 84 against Northwestern. They scored 100 in their first two games this year. They scored 100 3 times this year. They scored 99 another time. Like this is a really good offensive team, and they have a bunch of really good scorers. This is the style that IU does not play well against, and we said that a little bit with Thomas previewing Rutgers. Obviously, we didn't know Harper was going to play, which completely changes the game plan for the Scarlet Knights. But it's like this Penn State team, they make threes, they defend well at times, especially down low. They've given Indiana fits. Indiana has one regular season win under Mike Woodson against Penn State. What?
Yeah, I,
That should not happen.
no. And it's the same things every time. It's the three-point shooting and it's the point of attack defense. Now, Penn State's got the last year's Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, Ace Baldwin. He gave Indiana fits last year. Um, Xavier Johnson couldn't do anything. Gabe Cupps couldn't do anything. They could not get into an offense. And I mean, from start to finish in both of those games, it wasn't necessarily close. Even if the score was close, the game was not close. And Penn State's got new transfers in. They've got guys that stayed. This is pretty much the same team as last year for the Nittany Lions, and then they added pieces as well. I think this is going to be a tough test. Now we went through the our confidence in the road slate in a few weeks ago, and this was one that we said no. And even though Indiana's performance against Rutgers, given no not Ron Harper Jr., no Dylan Harper, um, I don't think my opinion changes here. I think this is going to be a really tough test for Indiana. Do I think they can win a little bit more at least? Yes. Am I confident that they will win? Not necessarily. I think it has a chance to happen, but Penn State is always giving Indiana trouble. I think that's going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, and Penn State has size. Conan Niederhauser, I think is how you say it, the Swiss. He's a junior. I don't want to say it's his first year at Penn State, but he's putting up some. No, he's actually been there for a few years. Funny, I don't remember him from last year, but I mean, he plays well, averaging 13 points a game this year in 23 minutes. He can even shoot the three. He's not afraid to do that. But like size is what Penn State. You have that down low. You have another 7-footer to combat what Ballo can do. This is like an example of like where I think Malik Reneau could be helpful, especially against a bigger guy. Maybe he can move around a little bit better. But this is going to be a tough test, and this is where you have to control the pace. You cannot play way too fast. You cannot go down by 10 points in an atmosphere like the Palestra, where obviously there's less seating because it's an older venue, but there's going to be a ton of noise. I know Penn State students aren't back yet officially on campus this weekend when they play on Sunday, but there'll be plenty of in-state staters that'll make the trip to Philly. So it's like one of these games where you just don't expect Indiana to win, but like the way they played in the last game gives you a little bit of hope. But it's like, can you control the tempo? Can you hold on to the basketball? Can you rebound the basketball? And can you make just enough shots to win this game? But at this rate, it's like with this team this year, I have less confidence in them winning on the road because they want to play, I think, quicker. And again, as mentioned, they want to play quicker this year. And on the road, like we've seen IU in the past, just they're not the same team away from Assembly Hall when it comes to pushing the tempo, when it comes to turnovers, when it comes to taking the right shots and not just chucking up and jacking up threes like it was against Nebraska. It's the second true road game of the year, and if they play any way like they did against Nebraska, I don't think they have much of a chance. And I mentioned that like I thought after the first few minutes, Indiana played well enough to beat Nebraska, but they just didn't have confidence to make the shots down the stretch. And we saw that with the cold spell in the last 4 or 5 minutes. That can't happen against Penn State, who is better than Nebraska. And this is a team that should make it to the NCAA tournament this year. And I know they may have gotten away with one against Northwestern last night, but so it goes when you're playing at home and Northwestern team that's obviously a little banged up and not the same as it was last year. But Penn State's good. Like Mike Rhodes showed it last year. Like that win against IU when they won at Assembly Hall was the turning point. It's like, oh, okay, this team's going to be good in a few years. And obviously, he brought plenty of guys over from VCU. I think is where he was. Mike Rhodes was before. Or George? No, was it VCU or George
That
Mason?
sounds right. Let me see.
It was some team in the A10. I want to say it was
Yeah,
George.
VCU.
VCU, okay. But like he brought guys over, like that was the turning point last year. And they obviously finished, I think, 10th in the Big Ten, but they were it was a jumbled Big Ten last year. Obviously, they lost to Indiana in the Big Ten tournament, so that will probably be on their minds, especially considering Indiana was without Trey Galloway for that game. But you have to take the right shots. You cannot let someone like Carlisle or Bryson Tucker just get in the game and take some bad mid-range jumpers because you cannot allow this Penn State team to run away That's something we've kind of seen them do in the past. And they ran away with it in the second half last year at Assembly Hall. It was essentially a wire-to-wire win last year at the Bryce Jordan Center. And somehow Indiana cannot beat Penn State on the road for the life of them. And I don't see that changing, unfortunately, on Sunday.
I think defending the three ball will be the most important thing for Indiana on the road. Last year against Penn State, gave up 12. Think back to 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they hit 17. They're consistently hitting threes at their home place, whether that's at the Palestra or whether that's at the Bryce Jordan Center, one venue much cooler than the other, I may say. Um, and I think that'll be the key. I think it'll be shot selection. The health of Malik Reneau will also be important. And then with that, if he is out, what are the lineups going to look like? If he's in, what are the lineups going to look like? Um, this is a Penn State team that will capitalize on your mistakes. They will capitalize on their strengths. They will play fast. They will shoot the three. They'll shoot the three well. Those are things that Indiana has tended to struggle with. So if Indiana can correct those things, try and play at their own pace and stop the three, I think they've got a chance to win. Um, it's going to be hard to stop for sure. Um, but yeah, as we wrap up, Austin, just final general thoughts. We'll take a stop as we always do and pause and see where you stand on the state of Indiana basketball right now after that win, um, and general thoughts.
Yeah, like it was a very solid victory from IU, and they needed it. Like after the way they played against Winthrop and Chattanooga, after the way they lost against Nebraska, just completely letting the Cornhuskers run away with it. Like you needed a win like this. You needed a confident victory where you have four different guys in double figures, which we haven't mentioned yet. Rice, Galloway, even though he fouled out, Mbako and Ballo, all in double figures. If you get three or four guys in double figures, you have a really good chance of winning. Rice was fantastic, and a lot of people said that 21 points and made all eight of his free throws as well in 36 minutes as well. Ace Bailey played 38 minutes, which is just remarkable. But regardless, Indiana needed a win like this, and they can set the tone for the rest of the season. They know they can show the rest of the league, hey, we can play the modern style of basketball that people want, even if it's because of an injury. And we just have to see. We're kind of just waiting on Renew's status and kind of that kind of waits and we can I feel like only make a judgment if we know where he's going to be and what his status is going forward. So a game they needed. It still hasn't moved the needle for me too much on this team. I looked at I know John Rothstein yesterday tweeted out the odds of various teams to make the NCAA tournament. Indiana is like minus 200 to not make the tournament. Like this is where the non-conference schedule was and where it put Indiana clearly behind the eight ball. They have to find a way to win on the road. I just don't see that quite yet. Let's be honest, like Rutgers without Harper is like really not a good team. Like they are really, really, really one of the weaker teams in the Big Ten. Even with Harper, I think they'll still finish in the bottom half of the Big Ten. I think that Rutgers is one of the more overrated teams coming into the year. I think we've seen Steve Pikiell, like a defensive guy, obviously a great coach, has done well at home, but like he has really like not done a ton to move the needle for me to really put Rutgers like in the conversation as one of the top Big Ten basketball programs. I know they've only been in the league for like 11 years now or whatever, but who cares about Rutgers? Indiana did well enough to win that game, enough confidence for me going forward to win home games against teams they really should beat. But last night we were kind of a little bit worried about what would happen against Rutgers. They did the job. Now you got to move on, find a way to win a road game at some point. Earlier is obviously better than later.
Now I'm going to go back to it one more time. You can have the right and the left, but if the other guy has the ace, king, queen, you're going to lose. So, you know, it was a good win for Indiana against Rutgers. The asterisk is still there for both sides with no Renew, with no Harper. Um, I think this Penn State game will be the most important game of the season so far for me as to seeing where this team stands. If they can build off of a big home win on the road in a tough environment against a team that has consistently beaten you. Um, so lots of things to see there. I'm not going to react too much. The Big Ten slate is still early. I'm still on the optimistic side. This team, if you put it into perspective, this team is 11-3, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, 11-3, 2-1 in the Big Ten. So I'm happy right now. I know the non-conference slate wasn't ideal as to what people wanted, but where you push yourself to get into March is in the Big Ten season. Indiana's done that so far. I don't think many teams are going to go on the road and beat Nebraska. So you've won the ones you're supposed to win. This is one that's going to be tough, but it's kind of closer to the middle because, Penn State still, actually, no, I'm going to give this one a little bit more to Penn State. Maybe last year, this is one that's kind of a toss-up, but I don't think it is this year. This will be an important game for Indiana to pick up a big win on the road, help out the rankings a little bit. Because then you look at Penn State's future schedule, and they've got three ranked teams after Indiana. So for one, they can't really overlook Indiana, but they've got at Illinois versus Oregon and at Michigan State coming up in their next three. So not necessarily an easy schedule, and I don't know how they're going to react to that with Indiana before them. But that'll be a matter of coaching. But all in all, not really too much of a reaction for me. I'm pretty happy with where Indiana is, 11-3, 2-1 in the Big Ten. Big time game against Penn State Sunday at noon on Big Ten Network. So that'll wrap things up for this one. Good win against Rutgers, big time game against Penn State. Excited to see what all happens for Austin. I'm Ian. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week for another episode of House of